Donell Barlow is here. She is a holistic health coach, yoga instructor, hairstylist, activist, and member of the Ottawa Tribe of Oklahoma. Her new memoir is entitled Medicine Tracks, and I am pleased to have her here today. Donell, welcome, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Before we talk about the memoir, would you tell us a little bit about your family and connection to the Ottawa Tribe?
Yes. So I am native on both sides. I am an enrolled Otter clan on my father's side. My grandfather, Amos Barlow, was his brother was Lewis Barlow, who was chief of our tribe. And so that's how we were able to get enrolled. So that's pretty exciting. And I am anticipating my first visit. I actually haven't gotten down there yet. It just hasn't worked out for me. So I'm going to be coming down for the powwow around Labor Day for the first time down to Oklahoma. I have been to my mother's reservation in Northern California several times, but I'm excited to finally be able to really connect with my dad's side.
Wonderful. Hopefully this podcast will be out before you come down, and so people know about your coming and can introduce themselves when the time comes. So that's wonderful.
So I'm excited to meet I want to be around a bunch of Barlows. So I'm excited for that, to see that extended family that I've actually never got to meet. It's time. So I'm ready to come down and meet people and hang out. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today and talk about the book.
And as people will note when they meet you, you're significantly younger than the average person writing a memoir. And so what inspired you to do this at this time in your life?
Well, I mean, definitely, as most of us, I've had a lot of life happen at this stage. And really, it was kind of also about, I wanted to put it out while some of it was fresh, some of the diversity that I go through and talk about in Medicine Tracks. But I was just really inspired and I had the time. And so I'm really glad that I did it before I had my daughter and became a single mother, because it would have been much more difficult, to take on that task now. But it just kind of aligned. The timing was right. And I wanted to share, just some of that diversity I've experienced up until this point. But I have so many more stories to share. I would love to write a sequel, if it permits.
And as you mentioned, the new book is entitled Medicine Tracks. And can you talk a little bit about the title and kind of what you explore through the book?
Yes. So, it took me a while to come up with the name because everything I thought of was already taken, for one, in some form or another. And so I really wanted it to embody your path. And that was my way of explaining, the journey and the path that we're on throughout life and how it can take different roads, depending on where we're at spiritually and emotionally and energetically. We take different paths in our lives and we learn different hard lessons that way. And so the Medicine Tracks is really about, using your intuition. And for me, it was really reconnecting more to my roots and my culture and practicing that form of spirituality as opposed to what I grew up with. That shaped, my new direction. And then I use animal totems to describe a lot of the people that cross my path because I found it to be an interesting way to, talk about the attributes of people and also bring in some of my culture and those understandings in that aspect. But it also worked with the whole Medicine Tracks concept, if that makes sense. So that was kind of a way to tie it all in together. And I call a lot of things medicine too. So to me, medicine is definitely not medication. That's the last thing that's medicine to me. But each chapter has a different form of medicine. So elder medicine would be spending obviously time with your elders, which some of us don't always get growing up. And so that is, one of my chapters of my book. And there's different ones. And so I really wanted to emphasize that there's so much around us that is medicine that we take for granted. But when we, sit back and we're present, we really realize truly how blessed we are.
And one of the medicines that I thought was one of your most interesting chapters was the one on food. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you see food as medicine and maybe even a little bit about Dance Jam Kitchen so that people can know what that is.
So food as medicine is really, it's the biggest platform I speak about as a certified holistic health coach. It is what helped me heal my body specifically. So I was raised by my dad since the age of 7 after my mom passed away. And so I grew up on a lot of processed food, as many of us do. The only exceptions is when I spent time with both of my grandparents who did cook and also cook traditional foods for me. But for the most part, it was processed food. And so I had a lot of digestive issues growing up, as many of us also do. And I had to, do my homework and figure it out and really go back to the ways of my ancestors and the plant medicine and their teachings to restore my relationship to food. I did seek, modern medicine first, and they didn't treat any of the actual causes. They just treated the symptoms, and they never asked me what I was eating. And so, that's really what it took for me to realize that, I had to take accountability and figure this out on my own. And then that became my journey. And once I was able to heal my body of all these ailments and symptoms I was having, I was so passionate about helping other people do the same. And it's just kind of progressed further and further. And, I just love now working with my Native American communities and youth, restoring that relationship again with our food and our plants.
You write in the book, and I'm quoting you here actually, the greatest experiences and moments I have had so far had to first come from a place of suffering. I was wondering if you can explain that a little bit. That's a very powerful sentiment.
Obviously when we're in the midst of facing trauma or diversity, it's painful and it's hard, and it's, we're not going to look at it in that way. But with time and really trying to understand these lessons that happen to us, sometimes those can be the most beautiful experiences because they teach us the lessons that we need to learn. For me, one of those would be patience, and that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And sometimes, we won't get it unless we're faced with some kind of turmoil. And it just makes us stronger. And then we can turn that around and flip the script and, use that to help other people and support them and offer them resources that maybe we didn't have. And then that allows us some additional healing that we didn't expect. And that was really why part of the reason I had wrote the book in the first place was to help others heal if I could, to offer comfort in my words or give them a new perspective if they had faced some of these same, traumas in their lifetimes as well, if they could relate in some way.
And one of the most powerful things about your book is how deeply personal it is. I mean, you spare no details of the most, intimate things about divorces and deaths and, relationships. And I wondered, was it hard for you to be, that vulnerable to, people that you might not even know reading this book? Was it cathartic? How was your process in terms of writing and exposing your, details of your life?
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult process. So there's a saying that if you write a memoir, it's like 10 years of hard therapy. And I completely agree with that statement because I went through a deep depression, which is not like me at all. I became very introverted, which is also not like me at all. I had to go back into those traumas and those experiences and relive them. I realized if I really wanted my readers to understand, those feelings and being in that moment, I had to relive them. And it was really difficult. I thought that I had healed through some of those things that happened when I was growing up. But when I started writing in this way, I realized that I hadn't. And so it did become another healing process for me that I didn't expect. And then the more I read my words and read them out loud, at first I would, get very emotional, but it actually became easier, over time. The more that I read my words, it didn't have the same effect on me, and it became more healing tears as opposed to, grieving tears.
And is there a particular message that you want readers to kind of gain from this work?
Yes, I really want people to trust their intuition. First and foremost, that really is our strongest superpower. I believe that fully. And I'm trying to empower. I really hope that people not only can take accountability for their own health, but also just really their path, and knowing that, the universe does conspire in our favor if we're being present and we're open to receiving those messages that it's trying to tell us. Teaching yoga, I'm always telling people to listen to their bodies, to honor their bodies, and to not push if it's the day that you shouldn't push, and not let the ego get in the way. And that applies to everything. So it's that, that relationship that we have with the mind, body, spirit connection, and just understanding that everything is connected. And that sometimes these things, these traumas, can actually lead you into a whole different direction and a whole new path that you were meant to be on in the first place. It just takes some time and understanding to get there.
Would you be so kind as to read an excerpt of your work for us?
Oh, definitely. I would love to do that. I prepared one specifically for you today because, my father, I'm Ottawa, I got his bloodline from that side. And so because I wrote the book to honor my father and his teachings, I wanted to read a specific excerpt about him. Okay, so the excerpt I'm going to be reading today is from chapter 2 of the book. And to set up some of the background story, I am just in the very beginnings of going through a pretty traumatic divorce. And I ended up having to sell my house. And then my dad decided he wanted to move at the exact same time. And we had also been seeing some signs of dementia for the last couple of years, but we had been kind of putting off the testing. My dad wasn't really wanting to go do it. So this really is going to focus on that change in my life, kind of address some of those changes and how the roles began to reverse, from him being more of my father figure and then me having to take on more responsibility for him as things began to change. Dad's move was more exhausting than my own, and I felt so relieved to have a professional mover's assistance. My ex-brother-in-law, Clark, who had been Laura's husband, came up to help us that weekend. As he remained close to my dad, even after Laura passed, I was grateful for his help, and my father loved the extra company. It took some time for my dad to get settled into his new apartment at the Ridge. He continued to question if he had made the right decision. But he was a social man, to say the least, and I hoped he would make some new friends. The facility offered a lot of activities, and my dad loved staying busy. It became too obvious after the move that Dad was struggling, and his behaviors were becoming even stranger. We decided it was time to take some tests to see if our concerns would be confirmed. I knew by this time we finally went in, we had put this test off for far too long. I suppose both of us were in denial, knowing what was ahead. As we reviewed the results with the doctor, she told us, with this level of education, he should have been able to answer the questions correctly. My dad had received his master's degree in education at the University of Idaho and had a doctoral degree from Penn State. In 2006, less than 5 years ago, he was elected as state legislature in Washington. He had always been reading a book or several books throughout my entire childhood. To say he was well educated was being modest. My dad never stopped learning. The full results of the test came back, and my dad was diagnosed with dementia. The doctors weren't sure how long he had suffered from it, but they needed to treat it now. They prescribed some medication to slow down the process, but eventually his memory would completely fade. This was unsettling news, and our worst fears were now confirmed. I wanted so badly to call James and tell him the news and hear some support. He had always been my go-to and a good listener, but things were dramatically different now, and I had realized I was alone in this. My father's well-being was my responsibility now, and I had to dig deep to find my strength. As I could have expected, our roles began to shift dramatically, and neither my father nor I was prepared for that battle. He was now taking several medications, and the dementia meds were just another one to add to the pile. I tried to educate him on natural medicine and diet alternatives, but he was convinced that I couldn't possibly know something his doctors didn't. He was old school and believed that the doctors always knew best. My dad was losing not just his memory, but also his freedoms. In the simplest of ways, he was losing everyday tasks that we all take for granted. No more driving for this guy or walks alone too far from the facility. I would have to provide transportation or get other resources to assist me. A nurse would administer his pills daily, eliminating the risk of him forgetting or taking too many. The more freedoms he lost, the more depression sunk in for him. I found it incredibly hard to watch this process. For a while, he took Buddhist meditation classes, which pleasantly surprised me. For being such a devoted Catholic most of his life, I never imagined he would be open to experiencing other forms of spirituality. When he mentioned he quit going, I felt disappointed for him. I had hoped it would give him some peace. Dad, I thought you liked these classes. He looked down with a sense of defeat and replied, in class, I couldn't remember what I experienced or how to explain it. I felt embarrassed during group discussions, feeling at a loss for words. It broke my heart to hear this. He was having to let go of another thing that made him feel so good. He stopped reading books completely and no longer read the morning paper, which had been his daily ritual. I realized while watching my father change that as the mind goes, the body will soon follow. His balance was highly affected, which made most of his physical activities too difficult to manage. I had to monitor his steps, watch him carefully as he walked up and down the stairs and curbs everywhere we went. I wondered if this is what being a parent feels like and viewed my dad through a different perspective. A few months back, I put his house on the market and into addition to my own. I used the same realtor, figured it would make things a little easier on me. The stress from selling both of our houses was overwhelming to say the least, and my dad chose to make it even more difficult. Suddenly, he didn't trust me or my intentions with his estate. He called me constantly every day over the phone saying, why is this taking so long? It should be sold by now. I want you to find someone else, Donell. Meanwhile, I was busy at work trying to make up lost income and still dealing with all the drama of my divorce. I felt extremely annoyed and take it for granted, with no thanks for helping me move or the other million things I did for him. I want to scream at the top of my lungs or run away and never look back. I love my dad, but he is driving me batshit crazy, and I was trying so hard to just deal. I had to calm myself down before returning to the call. I assured him, Dad, it's only been 2 months. Give it some time. The realtor is selling my house as well. Don't worry. He wasn't thrilled with my answer, but decided to let it go for a week or so. My reassurance didn't last long, and soon his calls became constant. If I didn't answer, he panicked even more. I was at work most of the time, and I knew he was being difficult. There were a few times I answered the phone already annoyed and short with him. Later, I regretted my behavior and vowed to only answer his calls when I was calm. He wasn't trying to drive me crazy. He just needed my attention, and I understood even then at some point these phone calls would stop, and I would miss hearing his voice. This was a lesson in patience, and it took me a great deal of time to realize that I needed and asked for this lesson. My experience so far has taught me the deepest level of learning is through these kinds of hard lessons. He didn't realize that he was still playing the role of my teacher. Even through his dementia, he had gifts to share with me and ways to mold me into being a better human. So during that time, there was a lot of reflection, obviously, and I didn't realize it till now, but he prepared me to be a mother.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that powerful story, Donell. It's you talking about, you're something that a lot of families have to deal with, and how you managed to, deal with that situation that is all too common and troubling.
Thanks. Yeah, it's the dementia, it's difficult, and we see it a lot. A lot of people see it with their grandparents and later on with their parents. And I don't have any immediate family. And so it was just me and the people that, I had to pay to help us. So it was definitely very difficult. But like I said, we can still find beauty sometimes, even through those painful moments. And that's what gets us through, each day and makes it just a little bit easier.
And Donell, if people want to connect with you, connect more with your work, what are some things they can look for? Where are some places they can go?
So I have a website. It's just my first and last name, DonellBarlow.com. I also have a Facebook page, Donell Barlow Health Coach. But my website has really all the updated information. I have recipes on there as well as cooking videos called Dance Jam Kitchen, which I started a few years back, just really trying to get people interested in eating food as medicine. And so I would dance while the food cooked so that we could put more love into the food. And I really just wanted to appeal to a different demographic than who would usually watch the cooking shows. And then there's a few other things on there. I have baby care, holistic care. I make a lot of my own products for my daughter, and I am happy to share those on my website. And then I have a children's book that will be released this summer called Bigfoot and Lightning Bug, which I'm really excited. And it has to do with the stories that I grew up hearing from my grandmother on my Yurok side, but also it's to honor my daughter. And so definitely be looking for that. this summer, which I'm really excited to be sharing. Something a little different.
Wonderful.
Different than a memoir. Hard to.
I bet, in a very different way, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah, totally different process, but still a lot harder than what you think it's going to be. Also encourage people to share their stories too. I tell people, if you got a book in you, write it. We all have stories to tell. So.
Well, thank you for being here today, Donell, and we'll see you Labor Day weekend.
Okay, I can't wait. Family reunion.